So to start, what's the shame triangle?
You want to go,
Yeah,
Dave?
so
or
the
me?
shame triangle is a constellation of internal parts that we seem to all have. I mean, it's pretty ubiquitous, at least in the context of our work with clients. What we're seeing is, again, we're starting with an internal family systems, an IFS perspective, that human consciousness is multifaceted, that we have various parts of ourselves, that it's not just one coherent total self that's acting across the board in all situations. We're recognizing from the IFS perspective, that there are parts of us that become active in response to unique situations, unique relationships, and so forth. So one of the things that we're seeing is that there's 3 specific parts that seem to operate in a very unique constellation that cause a lot of challenges for people, intrapersonally and interpersonally. And so in terms of relationships, it's relationship with self and relationship with other. And essentially what we're looking at are 3 distinct parts, one being the inner critic, the shame part that responds to the voice or the dictates or the sentences of the inner critic, and then escaper parts that respond to that interplay between shame and inner critic. So in this sense, we're saying that shame is not just a singular emotion or feeling or experience, but part of a constellation of parts that intermingle and make things more complex. And it's that intermingling, it's that intertwined tangliness of their interplay that make it so difficult often for people to suss out and recognize in their own inner experience. So that's a sort of a very high level, broad stroke there.
So I think my understanding of IFS is basically just to kind of put, because you defined it in your response there, but it's just kind of like there's different parts of us that are activated at different times that almost are like different characters, right? That show up in our lives, right?
Mhm.
And so there's these, when you talk about a triangle, you're talking about 3 distinct parts that are sort of working together to create, like you said, certain complications there.
Correct.
So where does shame figure into this?
Yeah, well, shame is sort of at the root of it. Shame we're identifying or as the part, defining as the part that hears the voice of that inner critic and then feels that. It's a collapsed part that then believes in first person all of the things the inner critic says, right? Or that others might say in the world, but really fundamentally says, I am broken, or I am not enough, or I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable. And it really has this deflated, defeatist story about the self, which is pretty intense and honestly can be very dangerous for ourselves as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think probably in like using the kind of common lexicon from the times we're in, it's that voice in your head, right?
Right.
It might be a little deeper than that, but it shows up as this voice in your head, like you're not smart enough to do that. And there's sort of a belief, right, that comes, it's sort of rooted in shame.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And shame is usually a younger parts of ourselves that had certain experiences, feelings, or proclivities about who we are, and they weren't fully allowed, or they were actively criticized by those around us. And so we learn very early on, like, oh, I've got to hide this. I've got to shut this down. If someone else sees this, I will be judged and fundamentally rejected. It's really a social survival part that comes into play.